Welcome to another session from Ekcel Academy. In this session, we're going to have a quick revision of one of the chapters from the subject setting up of business, industrial and labor laws. For the purpose of quick revision, I've selected the topic from Social Security Legislations, lesson number 19, unit 6, which is related to the labor law simplification of procedure relating to furnishing of returns and maintaining registers by certain establishments Act of 1988. So within 10-15 minutes, we'll complete the revision of the entire chapter. Getting directly into the purpose of the enactment, we know that labor law is vast. You have hundreds of legislation. Under every legislation, there is a requirement of maintaining registers, records, compliance, filing of returns. So for small establishments which have very few number of workmen, if you ask them to do so much compliance requirement, it will become cumbersome. They will also hesitate in initiating these business transactions because they don't want to get into the burden of so much compliance requirement. And that is the entire problem that is going to be solved by this enactment, where we are going to give a lot of exemptions for the small industrial establishments. That is, we are going to give them exemption. Exemption means they do not have to follow certain provisions of law. We have so many enactments. Under those enactments, they have to file annual returns and they have to maintain registers. If they come under the applicability of this enactment, that they are a small industrial establishment or a very small industrial establishment, they can claim an exemption from filing annual returns and maintaining registers. So that is the purpose, where we are going to give a lot of industrial establishment which have small number of people employed exemption from furnishing annual returns and exemption from maintenance of registers, and this act will be applicable to the whole of India. Any industrial establishment in any part of the country can claim an exemption under this enactment if they come under the definition of very small establishment or small establishment, which we are going to cover. Now, in between, we had brought an amendment to the act in the year 2014. With dual purpose. First purpose is, earlier the act was applicable to only those industrial establishment which had up to 19 workers. So if you had 1 to 19 number of workmen, only then you could claim an exemption under the provisions of this enactment. But now they want to increase the applicability of this provision to a lot more industrial establishments. So they put the maximum number of, they've increased the threshold to 40 workmen. Now, if you have up to 40 workmen, you can claim an exemption. Earlier, only if you had less than 19 workmen, only then you could claim exemption. Now, if you have less than 40 workmen, you can claim exemption. So they've increased the scope of applicability of this enactment to a lot more small industrial establishments. And second one is to permit the registers to be maintained electronically. Earlier, everything was physical documentation, but now they've permitted the documents to be maintained electronically. In addition to that, filing of returns are also made online in electronic form. So this is the two major reasons why we brought about the amendment to this act in the year 2014. Now let's directly get into the provisions of the enactment by seeing few important definitions. The term employer. Now see, we are going to talk about two things. One is this act, that is the simplification of procedure. The chapter that we are currently studying. Now, for the purpose of claiming this exemption, what exemption are we giving? We are giving them the exemption from maintaining annual returns and maintaining of a lot of registers under various labor laws. And labor laws are a lot of statutes, hundreds of enactments are there under the ambit of labor laws. So now, for the purpose of determining who is an employer under this enactment, we are not giving any specific definition. We have identified 16 enactments, 16 laws, 16 categories of labor laws, 16 enactments which are providing this exemption under this enactment. So it is not all the labor laws for which we are going to get exemption. We are going to get exemption from the applicability of certain provisions of the laws that are provided under only these specific 16 enactments which are provided under Schedule 1 of this particular enactment. So who is an employer for this act totally depends upon what definition has been given to the term employer under these specific enactments. For example, Factories Act is one of the enactment. So who is her employer under Factories Act? itself will be an employer for the purpose of this enactment. If you want to claim an exemption from the applicability of Factories Act, then we are going to see who is an employer under Factories Act. Same definition of employer will also be made applicable here. If you want to claim exemption under Minimum Wages Act, who is an employer under Minimum Wages Act, same definition of employer will be taken for the purpose of this enactment. So this enactment by itself is not giving any definition for the term employer. It just says employer in relation to the Schedule Act in relation to any other enactment just means the person who is required to furnish returns and the person who is required to maintain these registers under that act. That act means the Scheduled Act which has been specified under Schedule 1. So whoever is casted with the responsibility of filing the returns and maintaining registers under the principal enactment, they themselves under that who is defined as the employer or the person responsible, that person itself is going to be considered as employer for the purpose of this enactment. Second important definition is the term establishment. Again, the same logic applies here. Establishment is going to have the same meaning that is given to it under the Scheduled Act. If you are talking about Factories Act, the definition of establishment under Factories Act is going to become applicable. If you talk about Minimum Wages Act, the definition of establishment under Minimum Wages Act will become applicable. So whatever definition is being given under the scheduled enactment, same definition is going to be applicable, but they've added 5 other categories of establishments under this enactment, which is a industry or other establishment as per the Payment of Wages Act, any factory under Factories Act, any factory as under the Minimum Wages Act, any plantation under the Plantation Act, any newspaper establishment under the Working Journalist and Other Newspaper Employees Enactment. So these 5 categories of establishments are added in addition to what is being provided under the scheduled enactments. Now, coming to the term firm, what is a firm? Ultimately, what is the purpose of this enactment? To provide exemption to the small industrial establishment from compliance with the cumbersome labor law requirements. So, if you are claiming exemption from those enactments, there is some reporting requirement that you are required to do. So, instead of those complicated compliance, we are going to simplify your requirement, your filings and maintenance of registers. So under this enactment, the small and very small industrial establishments are required to file their annual returns in Form 1 and they are required to maintain registers and records in Form 2 and Form 3. So Form 1 is totally related to filing of annual returns and Form 2 and 3 are with respect to maintenance of registers. Form 2 talks about maintaining the list of employees along with their employment card, and Form 3 talks about their muster roll and wage registers. So these are the forms that are required to be filed under this enactment after claiming an exemption from compliance with other labor law provisions. Getting to what is the Scheduled Act, like I told you, we have identified 16 enactments from which you can claim an exemption of applicability with respect to filing of annual returns and with respect to filing of registers, maintenance of registers and records. So now, what are those Scheduled Act? Scheduled Act means all those enactments, all their statutes, all those legislations which have been mentioned under Schedule 1 of this enactment. What are those 16 enactments that have been specified? It is mentioned under Schedule 1 where 16 enactments are identified, them being the Payment of Wages Act, the Weekly Holidays Act, Minimum Wages Act, Factories Act, Plantation Labor Act, the Working Journalist and Other Newspaper Employees Conditions of Service and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, the Motor Transport Workers Act, Payment of Bonus Act, Beedi and Cigar Workers Condition of Their Employment Act, the Contract Labour Regulation and Abolition Act, the Sales Promotion Employees Conditions of Service Act, Equal Remuneration Act, the Interstate Migrant Workmen Enactment, the Dock Workers Act, the Child Labour Regulation Act, the Building and Other Construction Workers Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act. So these are the 16 different categories of enactment which have been recognized, and if you come under the category of small and very small establishment, you can claim exemption from applicability of these provisions, not the entire enactment. Please remember, you have to comply with these laws, but you are going to get exemption only with respect to 2 concepts, that is filing of annual return and maintenance of registers. All other provisions you have to follow. You have to follow the laws given under these respective enactments. That is not being exempted. What is being exempted here is only filing returns and only maintenance of registers, which is going to be simplified, and this particular enactment is going to become applicable, where you don't have to file a lot of things. Just Form 1, Form 2 and Form 3 will become applicable. Next, like I told you, you can claim exemption under this enactment only if you have limited number of workmen. That is, if you come under the category of small establishment or very small establishment. So what is the definition for small and very small establishment? Small establishment is an establishment where you have not less than 10 but not more than 40 workmen. Then you come under the category of a small establishment and you can get an exemption, and this limit is calculated in the previous year or any day on the preceding 12 months in the previous year, that is 12 months, at any given point, even on one day. If you are touching this threshold limit, that means you have 10 employees or you have 39 employees. In that case, the law will become applicable and you can claim exemption for the purpose of filing annual returns and maintaining registers under 16 enactments that we have seen. And the definition of a very small establishment is any industrial establishment which is going to have not more than 9 people, that is 1 to 9. Will come under the category of very small establishment, and they will also get an exemption from filing annual returns and maintaining of registers under 16 enactments, but they still have to maintain under this enactment. The complex procedure is not there, but a simplified version is there that they have to comply with. They are getting exemption from filing annual returns and maintaining registers under 16 enactments, but instead of that they have to do filing of annual returns and maintenance of registers under this particular enactment that we are currently studying. Now, coming directly to the provision, so important part that is here is what is a small establishment, what is a very small establishment, and the 16 enactments with respect to which exemption is given. Along with that, what is the purpose of this enactment? Very, very key areas. Now, getting directly to the provisions of the enactment, it just says that notwithstanding anything contained in any act, that is the scheduled act, 16 enactments are there, and in that a lot of provisions are there. Overriding that, without containing anything given on those enactments, from the day when this labor law exemption from furnishing returns and maintenance of registers by certain establishments act of 2014, it is not necessary for an employer in relation to a small establishment or a very small establishment to which 16 scheduled acts apply, for the purpose of furnishing any kind of returns and for the purpose of maintaining the registers required to be furnished under those scheduled enactments. So this is the enabling provision. Whatever has been given as the objective of the enactment under the preamble is implemented through this section 4, which says that a small establishment and a very small establishment need not follow the provisions under 16 enactments with respect to filing of annual returns and with respect to maintenance of registers. But they are required to do the necessary filings under this particular enactment, where they are required to do the furnishing of annual return in form number 1, and they are required to maintain registers under form number 2 and form number 3 for small establishments, and only form number 3 is required to be followed by a very small establishment. So small establishment is people between 10 to 40 workmen. In very small establishment, it is 1 to 9 workmen. So if you are a very small establishment, you also don't have to follow maintenance of two registers. You just have to maintain 1 register. So if you are a small establishment, you have to file annual returns form 1. In addition to that, you should maintain form 2 and form 3, which is with respect to maintenance of registers. But if you are a very small establishment, you just have to do the annual filings under form 1. In addition to that, you should maintain only form 3 and not any other records. Next, every such employer will still be required to comply with other provisions. Like I told you, we are going to give you exemption from only specific provisions with respect to filing of annual returns and maintenance of registers from 16 enactments, but other provisions will continue to apply. And what are those specific provisions which are going to continue to apply with respect to maintaining certain records is issuing the wage slip under Minimum Wages Act. So even if you are only maintaining Form 1, Form 2 and Form 3, in addition to that, under Minimum Wages Act, we issue something called as wage slip. You should continue to issue that wage slip to your workmen. Next, issue slips for measurement of work which is done by piece rated workers. We know different categories of identifying what is the wage. So if any employer is appointing people on the basis of piece rate, how much manufacturing they have done, how many number of units they have produced, in that case you are required to issue a slip for measuring how much work they have done on a particular day under the provisions of the Payment of Wages Act. That should continue to be maintained. And filing returns under section 88, 80A of Factories Act and under 32A and 32B of the Plantation Labour Act, which talks about what are the accidents that have taken place during the course of employment in the factory premises or in the premises of the plantation. So in addition to maintaining Form 1, Form 2 and Form 3, these three set of documents are required to be maintained. They will not get an exemption, that is with respect to issuing the wage slip, with respect to issuing the measurement slip of how much work has been done if it is on a piece rate basis, and lastly, if any accident has taken place under the provisions of Factories Act and Plantation Act, the incidents, okay, returns about what accidents have taken place, that will continue to become applicable. From these three things, you are not going to get any exemption. Next, the annual return in Form 1 and the registers that are required to be filed under Form 2 and Form 3, along with the wage slip, measurement slip and other documents that are maintained by the employer, either they can maintain it in physical form or they can maintain in electronic form. That could be in the form of a computer form, a floppy, diskette or any other electronic media. So it simply says that in this enactment, Form 1, Form 2, Form 3 and other documents are required to be maintained, that you can do either in physical form or in electronic form. But if you are going to maintain anything in the electronic form, at any point in time when the inspector, labor inspector is going to demand from you, you should be ready to provide them the printout of those documents as when demanded by the inspector. You are permitted to maintain in electronic form, but when inspector comes and demands that please give me this in physical form, you should remove the printout and hand over the physical documents to the inspector. So the documents are required to be maintained either physically or electronically, choice of the industrial establishment. But if they decide to keep it in electronic form, it should be handy and the printout should be provided when demanded by the inspectors. Now, who is responsible? Okay, so the employer or the person who is responsible is required to furnish the annual return in Form number 1. Okay, and whom are they required to submit this annual return? They are required to submit it to the inspector. Labor inspector is going to be in charge. With him, you are required to file the annual returns. If not the inspector himself, any other person will be designatedly and prescribed under the enactment. To that designated person, you are required to do the annual filings. Again, annual filings mode of submission can either be physical, where you are going to the labor office and doing the submission, or it can also be filed in an electronic form, where email can be sent to the designated email ID of the inspector or whichever is the contact person. Email ID will be provided. You can send your returns in Form 1 through email ID to the respective authorities. So section 4 subsection 3 says that annual returns are required to be filed in Form 1 before the inspector or any other prescribed person, and it can either be filed in physical form or it can be filed in electronic form. Electronic form means they do not have a website. You just are going to get an email ID. On that email ID you can send it. Next is section 6, that is the penalty provision. It says that at any point in time, if any person fails to comply with the provisions of this enactment, provisions are limited. You just have to do the annual filings under Form 1, maintain the register under Form 2 and Form 3, and maintain that wage slip, measurement work and filing of accidents. These documents you are required to comply. Even if this you are not able to do, you are not complying with the provisions of this enactment, which is a simplified procedure, then we can give you punishment. For the first conviction, that is first time when you are going to not follow the provisions of this act, we can impose a fine which may extend to 5,000 rupees. 5,000, done and dusted, case closed. Again and again you are repeating the non-compliance. Once we have given you a warning, we have imposed a fine and we say that please henceforth be compliant with the provisions. But even then there is second conviction, Second time you are held guilty for non-compliance. Third time, fourth time, subsequent non-compliance is there, then we are not only going to give you fine, but we are also going to subject you to imprisonment. So imprisonment of not less than 1 month, which we can extend to 6 months, and a fine which shall not be less than 10,000 rupees, but which can extend to 25,000 rupees, or with fine as well as imprisonment, both depending upon the seriousness of non-compliance. So penalty provision says that anybody who does not follow the provisions of this enactment is going to subject it to a penalty of 5,000, fine of 5,000 rupees for the first conviction, and for subsequent and second convictions, imprisonment of 1 month to 6 months depending upon seriousness, fine of 10,000 to 25,000 depending on seriousness, and either fine or imprisonment, or both fine and imprisonment depending upon what is the kind of non-compliance that has been committed. Now, a quick sum up. This one slide is going to give you a 100% recap of this entire chapter. What is the purpose? Providing exemption for small establishments employing small number of people from two aspects: furnishing of annual returns and maintenance of registers. What are these small establishments? We have two categories. One is small establishment and one is a very small establishment. Small establishment is any establishment employing 10 to 40 workmen, and very small establishment is employing 1 to 9 employees. So if you come under small and very small categories, then you can claim an exemption under the provisions of this act. And what is the exemption that is given? Two exemptions are given. First is exemption from filing annual returns, and second one is exemption from maintaining registers. Under what? Under 16 enactments, and those 16 enactments are mentioned under Schedule 1. Exemption from 16 acts which are mentioned under Schedule 1. Okay. Now, what is the compliance under this enactment? You just have two compliance. One is filing annual returns, that is done under Form 1. Second one is maintenance of registers, which is done under Form 2 and Form 3. Form 2 and 3 is applicable to small establishment, but for a very small establishment, Form 2 is not there, only Form 3 is sufficient. Next, you are required to file annual returns. Annual returns are required to be filed under Form 1. It is required to be submitted to the inspector or any other authorized person. It can be submitted either in physical or electronic form. Next, mode of maintenance of registers and records. It can either be maintained in physical form or it can be made in electronic form. But if you are maintaining in electronic form, it should be made available as printouts to the inspector when he is going to demand. Apart from just maintaining Form 1, Form 2 and Form 3, three other factors are there that is requiring continuous compliance even after getting an exemption. That is issuing of wage slips, issuing of slips relating to measurement of the work, and filing of returns relating to accident under Factories Act and Plantation Act. Lastly, penalty provision. For first conviction, a fine of up to 5,000. For second and subsequent offence and conviction, imprisonment 1 to 6 months, fine of 10,000 to 25,000 rupees, or imprisonment and fine. Both can be given. So this is a quick recap of the entire chapter that we have covered. Now let's quickly have a look at some questions from this particular chapter that have been asked by the institute. Sky Enterprise is a newly registered firm and it intends to start a small manufacturing unit and will operate only with 25 workmen. The management of Sky Enterprise is now concerned about the compliance burden relating to maintaining a lot of registers and submitting the multiple returns under different labor law provisions. The newly appointed HR head has come across the enactment, that is simplification of procedure for furnishing returns and maintaining register by certain Establishments Act 1988, and believes the firm may be eligible for claiming an exemption as a small establishment under that particular act. Based on the provisions of this enactment, answer the following questions. What are the eligibility criteria for Sky Enterprise to avail the exemption under this enactment, and which specific labor laws are covered under the first schedule for claiming this exemption? Direct question. For the first thing, we should give what is a very small enterprise and what is a small enterprise, and knowing that they have 25 workmen, we can put them under the category of a small enterprise and make them claim exemption under this particular enactment. And next one is, we have to mention the 16 enactments that are a part of the first schedule of the act. Let's see the guideline answers. As per section 2 subsection E of this particular enactment, small establishment is an establishment in which there are not less than 10 but not more than 40 workmen employed in any day in the previous 12 months. And since Sky Enterprises has only 25 workers, it is qualified as a small establishment and they can avail the exemption and benefits provided under this act with respect to, they've just said in this act, but you can continue writing with respect to filing of annual returns and maintenance of register. So you complete that. Exemption with respect to what? They can claim exemption under this act with respect to what? With respect to filing annual returns and maintenance of registers and records. Right? And the second question is, what are those enactments that are mentioned under Schedule 1? So this is not concept oriented, it is just your memory that you have to reproduce. The 16 enactments that are specified under the first schedule of the enactment are, and I've already dealt with the 16 enactment, mention those 16 enactments. So it is a direct theory question, direct applicability of the provisions, no interpretation required. In the first part it is required, but it is not very serious. You just have to see the number of employees and say whether exemption is available or not available. That is all. So it's a very direct and simple question that has been asked by the institute with respect to this particular chapter. So within a small duration, we have completed one entire part of lesson number 19, one entire enactment we have covered. If this video is helpful, please hit the like button and please subscribe our channel for more such quick revision videos.